Well, hello, and thank you for taking the time to view our webinar, Payment Fraud Trends, Key Threats to All Businesses. My name is Mark Ike. I'm the partner in charge of the information security practice at CliftonLarsonAllen. And I've been doing this now for some 25 years, and I cannot remember a time in my entire practice where I've seen an environment where hackers have the ability to very directly steal money directly from bank accounts and from companies. And it is really industry agnostic. As you can see from this list, we've just in the last 2 weeks, this is just 2 weeks worth of phone calls to our incident handling and forensics practice. We've dealt with a mining company, electrical contractor, Catholic church parish, healthcare entities, small Main Street organizations, and it just goes on and on and on. So this really is a huge issue, and so over the next 60 minutes or so, we're going to talk about what the issue is, how hackers do their business, and then we're going to wrap up with a very organized 10-step program to help you protect your business. No matter what your line of business, 10 things everybody should be doing. So I want to start with the lay of the land. 3 reasons why we should care. The first is organized crime. This is big business for organized crime. They attack us 2 ways. They're looking for, first of all, they're looking for personal financial information. Organized crime has set up a wholesale to retail distribution chain for personal financial information that would make Walmart absolutely envious. In this case, the hackers are the wholesalers. They attack businesses searching for name, address, social security number, driver's license number, bank account number, credit card number, etc. The more data elements that can be linked and correlated to an individual person, the more valuable that packet of information is. The wholesale hacker then sells that information to organized crime. Anywhere from $2,000, $2,500, is often as high as $3,000 per record, depending on how complete the record package is. So organized crime then, they take their information, they take that packet and they establish credit relationships at places like Best Buy, Home Depot, Circuit City, and the like, places where they can very quickly accumulate electronics and appliance, big box type items. When I say very quickly, what I mean is on the order of 24 to 48 hours. The reason they need to move quickly is because the credit card companies and the banks have become very adept at spotting that activity and shutting it down. If you've ever had a phone call from your credit card company wondering if you're buying gas in China, for example, you can see that they have a very advanced anomaly detection system in place that identifies that activity. However, in the short span of time, they've converted their $3,000 high-end investment to $30,000, $40,000, sometimes $50,000 worth of goods and services, or goods that they can resell. You know, when you think about it, that what that does is make very small entities higher profile targets. If you have, for example, if you're a small employer and you have 10 employees and you maintain their payroll records on your network, well, you're a high value target now, because at 10 people at $3,000 per record, that's a worthwhile hacking attempt. And that's kind of a theme. Hackers are making money at this, and they're making a lot of money at it, and so they're putting more effort into it and creating more targeted attacks than they ever have before. So if you have PFI on your network, you're a target. The other thing that makes you a target is interacting with your financial institution to do online cash management in terms of ACH, wires, or credit cards. And I'm going to spend a great deal of time talking about how we're targeted that way. That list that you saw on the previous slide, virtually all of those companies were and organizations were victims of some type of corporate takeover payment fraud, with losses ranging on the low end from $29,000 to the high end at $5 million. And at least one of those businesses is very likely to fail because of the impact of the attack that was executed. Bottom line, hackers are targeting you. Wall Street Journal front page, July, even 2 years ago now, indicated that a big shift in hacking activity from large enterprises to small customers. Very, very important trend. This is an expensive thing to our global economy. According to Norton and Symantec, payment fraud costs the economy over $114 billion annually. When you add the time lost and other related tangential costs, that's another $274 billion. So you can see, taken together, cybercrime costs more to the world than the global black market in certain drugs. Hackers go for the easy money. Hackers have essentially figured out that it's hard to break into the bank. The banks have very robust defensive measures. Their firewalls and intrusion detection systems have become state of the art. But they figured out it's easy to go after the bank's customers and essentially backdoor the bank and gain access to funds that way. All this is creating a very unique détente between banks and their customers. We have banks suing customers and customers suing banks. And all of the lawsuits sound something like this. We have banks suing their customers and saying, good grief, customer, you cost us $5 million and you allow 2-digit passwords on your network. You're not even doing basic things to protect your own network, and that resulted in us taking a loss. And then we have the customers pointing back at the bank saying, good grief, bank, I run 10 grand a day through here and $5 million goes out and you don't even notice? And so we have a very interesting set of finger pointing going on, and the last item on the slide says that court cases will eventually set the standard. I haven't seen that yet. I'm seeing some cases where banks are winning, some cases where customers are winning, and the specific facts and circumstances are ruling the day in each instance. So let's begin the process of talking about how to do business safely by talking about the lay of the land. I'm going to use some security reports that are going to paint a picture, and I use the term blocking and tackling. One of the things that we find is that too many organizations are not doing the basic blocking and tackling they need to protect their network and the systems on their network. And then I'm going to talk about the most common attack vectors, the most common way that organized crime and the professionals are committing the cybercrime. And then very methodically, we're going to walk through 10 key defensive measures that businesses of all size need to deploy in order to protect themselves from this threat. So I'm going to use 3 security reports. The SANS top cybersecurity threats from September of 2009, and I'm going back to 2009 because that's when the trend really started. The trend that I'm going to describe has not changed since 2009. And then I'm going to use intrusion analysis from 2 different companies, TrustWave and from Verizon Business Service. The significant trend we saw in the SANS top vulnerability disclosure is the migration from server-side vulnerabilities to client-side vulnerabilities. Now, 2 terms there, vulnerability and client-side. What do I mean by both? Well, a vulnerability is essentially an error in software. It's an error that has a security implication to it that essentially allows the attacker to obtain de facto admin privilege without ever providing credentials such as a user ID or a password. And so the yin and yang here is that the attackers discover vulnerabilities in the systems that we deploy, and then the software vendors, once that vulnerability becomes known to the public, and hackers begin to use it to exploit systems, well, then the software vendors like Microsoft and Apple and others, they issue what's called a patch, which fixes that vulnerability. So the yin and yang for your IT shop, and it's a difficult challenge, is to stay up to date, as up to date as possible with those vulnerabilities. I'm going to introduce a concept here, and it's the belt and suspenders concept. One of the challenges that we have with this type of hacking is that our attackers have the ability to root out and find the one-off, the one thing that's missing. So whereas in manufacturing, for example, a 93% error rate when we're cranking out widgets might be an acceptable error rate, when we're doing patching, having just one missing patch can have devastating results for us. So if we have an email server, for example, that has 245 known vulnerabilities, and we have 244 patches, well, the hackers have a tool that's going to root out and find the one that's missing. So this is a significant issue, and you'll hear it more than once on this webinar. The point of this slide is that the attackers have migrated their vulnerability research efforts from server software to client-side software, meaning the software that we put on our laptops and our desktop workstations that connect to the network. And that effort is largely geared towards the new wave of phishing attacks that we're going to see. So this issue precedes the later discussion that we're going to have about phishing, in particular spearfishing. So it's no longer good enough just to make sure our operating systems are up to date with patches. We also have to make sure that our applications, everything that we're offering up on our desktop, is up to date with those patches as well. All right, so that'll be a theme. So let's move on to our second theme, which is blocking and tackling. And we have an analysis report, an intrusion analysis report done by Trustwave. Trustwave is a company that specializes in credit card security. And so they analyzed hundreds of breaches related where credit card data was the primary objective for the attacker. And what we see here is that by far remote access and third-party connections were the top method of entry. But then when we drill in farther, 90% of the time those things get attacked. We find default vendor-supplied or weak passwords. This is just pure blocking and tackling. One of the things that we need to be aware of is that any system that we put into play, whether it's a router, a server, an email server, anything like that, there are going to be what we call default conditions, and one of the default conditions is default passwords that are on the default user accounts. And every hacker in the world trades in that information and knows where to find that information. And so if we don't change those things, hackers will have an easy pathway into our organization. The theme of easy pathway is kind of continued in our Verizon breach analysis. Verizon did the same thing as Trustwave, only this is a little broader in context. It's not just related to credit card theft. It's all different types of breaches. Again, they analyzed hundreds of breaches in 2010 and 2011, and we find commonalities. This table comes directly from the Verizon report. 85% of the attacks in 2010 that they looked at were not considered highly difficult. Things like the unchanged default password that I talked about on the previous slide. 96% of breaches were avoidable through simple or intermediate controls. Okay? And that's the focus of the 10 things I'm going to conclude with. What we found in 2011 is actually a step backward. We still had 96% avoidable, but we went from 85% not highly difficult to 92% highly difficult. So this is clearly a disturbing trend, and you can see why hackers have turned their attention away from banks and are looking for easier targets. This slide again comes from the final slide here from the 2010-2011 Verizon report. And what we see here is an uptick in targeted attacks. In 2010, we saw 17% targeted. In 2011, we saw 21% targeted. And that, again, goes to the statement I made earlier. There's so much money to be made doing this that attackers are really upping their game, and they're making more sophisticated attacks, and they're putting more, for lack of a better term, manual effort into those attacks. This last piece here, Table 6, discusses the types of external agents. In other words, fancy terminology for who's attacking us. And this comes from the 11 report. We see 58% organized crime and 40% unaffiliated people. And we wouldn't be surprised by that, because we've been talking about organized crime a great deal. But the big thing here is that this is for the first time the organized crime group is below 90%. And what that tells us is not that organized crime is getting out of the business, but that a lot of these unaffiliated people, these free agents, are getting into the business. Why? Again, broken record, because there's so much money to be made. So that's a long way of saying that our universe of potential attackers is growing day by day, and the money to be made is attracting it. That's our lay of the land. It's kind of a bleak lay of the land. We have a lot of work to do to get our networks up to speed. So the first thing we need to do is understand how these people attack us. All right, and there are three clear trends. Social engineering that I'm going to talk about, email phishing, and more specifically spearfishing. And then the goal of both of those is to inject malware onto our network. In this case, very purpose-built malware called online banking Trojans, or an online banking Trojan horse. So let's look at each one in turn here. Bruce Schneier, very famous thought leader in the security industry, very famously said that amateurs hack systems and professionals hack people. And based on what I've seen in the wild, I couldn't agree more. Social engineering, the way I define it, it's the use of non-technical means to gain information or access to technical system. And we break that down three ways: phone calls, building penetration, and email attacks. Now, the pretext telephone calls, oftentimes they go something like this: "Hello, I'm Mark Ike from Quest. We're doing a test on your network. There's a lot of congestion in your segment. I'm going to need your user ID and password so I can troubleshoot that issue." Okay? So that's kind of a stupid, simple call. Nobody's going to fall for that. But the point is, I posed as somebody in authority, in this case Quest, and I asked for sensitive information, in this case a user ID and password. And this is a non-technical way for an attacker to take advantage of people and harvest information that could be useful in a hack. The other thing that we've been seeing a great deal in the wild is a phone call that convinces someone to download code, and often done under the guise of downloading a software update or a security update or a patch update, something along those lines. If the attacker has done their homework, they'll do some name dropping. For example, they'll say, I'm John from your application vendor. Joe in IT asked me to call to set up this security update download. And they'll get on the Google and find out who the IT person is at their victim organization, so that they can name drop and appear to be an authority. Very, very common attack vector. The second thing we see is building penetration. People actually walking through their door at your brick and mortar to see what's available to them. Two very common things we see there. Number one, attaching a wireless access point to a data port that might be in a common area. The second thing that we see very often is a concept called seeding. You see that there on the slide. Seeding basically involves dropping some type of removable medium. Could be a CD, could be a DVD. Most commonly now, it's a USB flash drive, and we drop that either near the building, such as in the parking lot, or inside the building, such as in a lobby or a common area. And the idea there is that someone in the target organization will pick that up and insert it into their workstation, whether it's a laptop or a desktop. They'll insert it in there to figure out what's on it, and once they insert it, auto-run malware kicks off and penetrates their system. So a very unique method to increase the likelihood of someone inserting the USB drive in a engagement from Ohio, where the attackers used white athletic tape on the USB flash drive, and they used a Sharpie marker to write 2013 salary adjustments on the flash drive. Clearly increased the likelihood that was going to get put into a system, put into some type of device. So we have phone calls, we walk through the front door. Again, those seem like high effort, but there's money to be made. So we're seeing an uptick in these high effort type of attacks that used to be only relegated to the largest of the large organizations. Finally, we have email attacks, specifically spearfishing. And I use the term spearfishing to differentiate it from first-generation phishing, which I tend to call wide net phishing. In a wide net attack, like, for example, a Nigerian email scam that you've probably seen, the objective is to get at one customer at a time. And so I'll send out 40 million of those, hoping for a 0.1% response rate. If I get that much response, I'm in business making money. With the spearfish, though, the goal is to root the network. And rather than 40 million emails with the second-generation phishing, I'm going to send one email into the network. That email is going to contain a website link on it, and my goal is to convince the recipient to click on that website link. If I'm successful, if they click the link, what returns to them is a web page that appears similar to what they expect, because the attacker doesn't want to tip them off, but in the background is malware that's being installed and running. And again, that malware is going to look to try to leverage unpatched vulnerabilities that may be resident on a workstation or a laptop. So here's our one-to-one linkage to the SANS report and the migration to the client-side vulnerability research that is being done. With so much at stake here, hackers are doing things to increase the likelihood that the emailed link will be followed. The first thing that they're doing is they're spoofing the email. That means they're essentially forging the email to look like it's coming from someone in authority. Classic example is we saw this deployed at one of our bank clients. The marketing director at the bank received an email that appeared to come from the president of the bank. Very well-crafted email, looked a lot like just like it came from the bank president. The second thing they do is create a customized text that combines with the spoofing that creates the pressure to act quickly without thinking. So in this case, in the example that I referenced earlier, marketing director receives an email, appears to come from bank CEO, and in the body of the email, it said something, to paraphrase, it said, Mr. Marketing Director, our biggest competitor is opening a branch right across the street from our most profitable branch. How is it that haven't been aware of this yet? What kind of marketing director are you? And it was definitely a well-crafted email that created pressure on that person to act quickly. So in some cases, recall our discussion on targeted versus opportunistic attacks. In some cases, we see emails that after some Google hacking, Google research by the attacker, are very, very well crafted and well spoofed. In a moment, I'm going to show us how to potentially spot those things. We're also seeing a breed of these emails that is a little bit of a hybrid between the wide net and the spearfishing, where we're spoofing not someone in authority at the target, but we're spoofing an organization that might likely be used by someone at the target. So as an example, here at CLA, I've received emails from American Express cards, from Wells Fargo, from DHL and FedEx that look very believable and have a message body that creates some pressure on the user, and it contains, like I said, just like these, contains a website link that would lead to a web page that has a malware payload to it. So we're seeing very targeted spearfishing. We're seeing a bit of some hybrid type spearfishing. I mentioned that we could spot potentially spoofed emails, and this is a very useful trick to teach your users in your organization. And it has to do with the difference between an internal email and an external email. An external email is one that traverses the internet and comes to your email server after traveling across the internet. So, for example, an email from a customer or an email from a supplier, somebody from outside the organization, it's going to appear with both that type of email will appear with both the email alias, in this case Randall J. Romas, and the entire email address listed up next to it. So this is an example of what an external email address should look like. By contrast, an internal email would appear with only Randall J. Roma, so with only the alias. And an internal email is one that does not traverse the internet. It's from one employee to another. It stays on the inside of the organization on your own internal private network. So if a user receives an email that displays like this, with both the alias and the broader address displayed, and it's coming from a fellow employee, somebody who should be internal to the organization, that's a clue, a very reliable clue, that email has likely been spoofed. And users can be taught to treat that with quite a bit of suspicion. The website tip-offs are a little harder to spot. You'll see down on the bottom here, the website is taking us to microsoft.issgs.net rather than microsoft.net. For savvy users, that's a good tip, but for bulk of us, myself included, that can be harder to spot. We teach, when we do awareness training at companies, what we tell employees is to be very, very wary of any website link. And if you believe that the link that you want, that arrived in the email, is some valid place that you want to go, what I recommend doing is not clicking on the link, but rather opening your own browser and navigating to that website directly. That way the email link can't take you to a rogue place. So, for example, at home, my wife shops at jcpenney.com. When she gets an email saying we got a big sale, come out to visit our website, I tell her, honey, close that email and open up your browser and use your favorites to go to jcpenney.com, because if they really are having a sale, that's where you'll see it. Okay, that can help protect you from falling for one of these scams. All right, you can see both those examples in a little higher definition there. Here's an example. I mentioned that the web page that gets returned looks believable. That's the primary point of this slide, is to show you how believable those things are. When you receive this, you would never expect it to be a rogue website. And again, the only telltale sign here is the ISSGS there, right in front of the .net. And in the background is running the malware. And so what we see, that whether it's a phone call or an email or walking through the door with a seating device, the whole The whole objective is to get an online banking Trojan installed on the victim network. By far the most common names for these Trojans are Zeus, Citadel, Gozi, SpyEye, and Cinewall, and by far the most common of those is the Zeus virus. These things they're very elegant pieces of malware. They're purpose-built to attack the online payments. They will replicate themselves from machine to machine inside your network until they find the machine where your accounting or finance people process wires and ACH. It's trained to spot that type of activity. Once it finds it, it will, using basic key logging principles, steal the user IDs and passwords and challenge response questions that you use to log on to the online banking. Then that simply allows the attacker then to log on in a separate session as you and execute fraudulent wires in ACH transactions. Once the money is out, it tends to move very, very quickly. In most of the cases we've looked at, the money hops 2 or 3 banks very, very quickly after it's initially stolen, making the idea of clawing back that money very, very difficult to do in most cases. Once it finds a home, typically on the East Coast, and these money mules go to work. Money mules are essentially individuals who've been recruited by the attackers who help them get the money from U.S. banks into overseas banks. Oftentimes, the money mule is somebody that believes they're going to work for a valid business, and they believe that they're processing payments and transfers in legitimate business settings. In reality, they're working for the online criminals, in most cases, organized crime. One of the most common ways that we use to weed out these attackers is multi-factor authentication. Essentially what multi-factor authentication does is it provides a third element to our login process, a second factor. You have your normal user ID and password to get onto the online banking system with the token, like the RSA token you see on the screen. Now you have a third code that you have to enter, and that code changes every X number of seconds. The amount of time is configurable, but the key is that it's a one-time use only device, or one-time use only token. And so even if the attacker steals the user ID, password, and that token, the minute your session is done, that token's no longer going to be valid. And so it's an excellent tool to weed out a lot of these types of attacks. So clearly recommend, if your bank offers it, to absolutely use it, enroll in it, and use it. But don't think of it as a silver bullet. The more sophisticated malware now, some newer versions of Zeus, for example, give the attacker the ability to bypass the multi-factor token, essentially by stealing some of the session authentication information in real time. Very high. It all happens in real time. It's high effort, but in one case we worked with an electrical contractor. They lost $250,000 in a wire transfer where the attacker injected himself real time into a logged-in session with the token in place and got that kind of money out. So at $250,000 a score, it's worth the effort to the attacker. So let's talk about key defensive measures. Let's walk through 10 things very methodically that every organization should consider. As we begin this discussion, hopefully this issue is apparent to us by now. Security is a business issue. It's not totally a technical issue. Okay? Our objectives are standard: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But our strategy is not just technology. It needs to contemplate policies and physical security as well. So our first of our 10 keys is strong policies. Our employees need to understand how to use email properly, how to handle website links, what to do with removable media. But most importantly, in my view, is the idea of users versus administrators. And the concept is relatively simple. Users use, administrators administrate. In other words, users should not be involved in downloading software, installing software, changing configurations, things of that nature. That should solely be the domain of your IT department. And users should understand that, and that should be part of your culture. Strong majority of the social engineering and email attacks that we see revolve around this, revolve around tricking a user into doing something that should be only the realm of the administrator, such as downloading and installing a software update. Okay. So users use, administrators administrate. 20 years of doing insider computer fraud, this is the most common issue that I see users having far more access permission than what they need to get their job. They get their job done. The principle of least privilege tells us that our users should have everything they need to get their job done, but nothing that they don't need to get their job done. And one of the things that we've seen, a significant trend that we've seen, is removing local administrator rights in Windows environment, Windows network environments. Obviously, we understand what domain admin is, administrator rights on this file server. But IT shops, largely in response to these hacking methods and malware introduction, are removing local administrators from the laptops and desktops that connect to their networks. So if it's practical, I strongly encourage that. It does not eliminate the introduction of malware, but it inhibits it greatly. One of the things that when you remove local administrator rights, one of the implications is users can no longer install software on their own. So in the previous slide, we made it a policy element. In this strategy, we enforce that policy element by taking away local administrator privilege on the local Windows machines. Step 3, harden our internal systems. By default, everything that we deploy is wide open, weak, and easily attacked. We have weak authentication, weak configuration settings. We have unnecessary services, other software that's installed that we absolutely don't need. We have missing system patches. Okay? So we really should use a hardening checklist to make sure that our network is configured the way it should be for business. Okay? One of the cornerstones of hardening is the use of strong passwords, particularly on the network and any kind of domain user account. And I've got a tip for that here on the next slide. Our fourth strategy then is a data-centered encryption strategy. So classify your data. What's important data to you? What's sensitive data to you? Things like intellectual property rights, things like sales information, things like personal financial information. Identify it and then follow it through your system. Follow it through email. Follow it where the network. Where is it at rest? Where does it move in transit? And encrypt all of those places. One of the most commonly overlooked places, email-enabled cell phones. Most often, without some third-party add-on software, information that resides on an email-enabled cell phone will not be encrypted. Okay, I mentioned a tip to build a strong password. This is a very challenging thing for users, and it creates a lot of security vulnerabilities if it's not done properly. So our tip is to build a password from a phrase. So you start with a simple phrase. You know, when we think about passwords, we'd like them to be easy for us to remember, but really hard for others to guess or to crack. All right. So we start with a simple phrase. I like to eat Oreo cookies at night, and just do simple substitution, taking the first letter of each word. And that generates a password, ILTEOCAN. Even better, with a little thought, we can make some other substitutions. We can use capital I, L, number 2, capital O because it's a proper noun, C, @ symbol, N. Very difficult password for others to guess. Very difficult for a hacker to crack, but easy for you to remember if you know that it's generated from that phrase. Okay? Good tip. Number 5 on our 10 keys to mitigate risk, I alluded to it in the hardening piece, and that's a vulnerability management process. We talked about those vulnerabilities, the yin and yang of discovering vulnerabilities and then applying those patches. So here's where we need a real belt and suspenders approach. Oftentimes our IT shop will very appropriately use a tool that pushes out the security patches to the servers and to the workstations and laptops that IT is charged with managing. And that's a phenomenal process, and that's the belt. Running some type of vulnerability scanning tool, then in addition to that, which crawls the network to look for systems that are missing patches, that's the suspenders. And that's an important thing to do, because even with a tool, sometimes those patches, they hang up in the installation process, or just for whatever reason, they don't install properly, but they report back to the tool that they have installed properly. And we see that over and over and over. And so that's why we recommend a belt and suspenders type of approach. Well-defined perimeter security layers. Most of us get this one right. I've highlighted network segment in red because I'm going to hit on that in one of the last strategies when we talk about knowing our bank tools. One of the things that we may want to consider is actually segmenting the machines that process our ACH and wire transfers. I'm hinting at it here. I'll come back to it. Number 7, centralized auditing and logging. I can't tell you how many times in our incident handling and forensics practice our clients have negative light bulb moments because they believe something's being logged when it's actually not. This is another hardening issue. By default, most logs are turned off. And so in our hardening process, we have to determine what we want to log and how often we want to log it. So my caveat here is please log everything that you can operationally stand to log. By that I mean take everything that you can turn on that won't kill your operation, because when you turn those things on, now you've got files that are filling up, and you got to do something with those files, or they're going to over time hurt your hard drive capacity on your devices. So we got to manage this a little bit. That's where a tool like a log aggregation tool, if you can afford one, is a great option for this. It allows you to turn on all your logs and centralize them in an easy place to deal with. Now, this is super important. These logs are not things that you're going to use on a day-to-day basis, but when an adverse event occurs, they are going to provide absolutely critical information to the forensic team to properly analyze and respond to whatever type of breach that you're dealing with, whether it's malware or any other type of hacking event. Having an incident response plan is critical. The companies that we deal with that have one, they identify the threats faster, they stop them faster, and they suffer less damage because they are prepared on the front end. They have gone through the process of identifying who their key forensic partners are. They've got data leakage prevention and monitoring in place. They've gone through the process. One of the things that these types of organizations have, the ones that are well prepared, they have a culture where IT accepts any and all question from a user, because oftentimes those users, they spot something unusual, and it's the first line of defense. So an IT shop that welcomes any and all questions, no matter how seemingly awkward or silly the question is, they are much better prepared for these. This is phenomenally important, knowing and using our bank tools. Every bank that we interact with has a different array of defensive measures to provide security over the online cash management process that governs ACH and wires. So you see a laundry list there: multifactor authentication, dual control and verification for wire transfers, out-of-band verification, which essentially means using something other than the online system to verify that a transaction is valid. So, as an example, a callback threshold on a wire transfer. So you can set it up with your bank at an appropriate threshold, so that any wire over X dollar amount requires the bank to call your organization to verify its authenticity before the bank processes the wire. ACH positive pay and blocks and filters. These allow us to set up specific predetermined payees in our ACH system, so that if an attacker attempts to introduce fraudulent payees, those are spotted and blocked automatically by the ACH system. It's tremendously important that you look at all the array of tools that your bank provides and review your bank contracts relative to all these, and make sure you deploy as much of these as you can. Most banks now don't mandate that you utilize all of the defensive measures that they have, but they make them available. And so if you opt out of some of the defensive measures that they provide, you can leave yourself vulnerable not only to a loss, but to the inability to recover any of that loss in any type of litigation situation. Also, it's a great idea to monitor account activity daily. One of the common threads that we see in these types of attacks is that oftentimes it is some type of manual human intervention that spots an attack and stops it either before it's occurred or soon enough to claw back the money. Now, the last one I have there, it's in bold, and it points back to that network segmenting. One of the things that I would recommend is we isolate a PC for our wire and ACH process with the bank. Now, what does that mean? Well, you can go down to Best Buy, and for $200 you can buy a little netbook that will surf the internet. Okay? And so if you're a smaller organization, you could take that or a small number of those and completely physically segment them from the rest of your network. That way, if malware gets introduced by someone on the main production network, it's physically separated from the PC that's used for wires and ACH. This works well if your activity is at a predetermined time every day, or maybe we only do it once a week, and there's only a limited number of people involved in it. If that makes sense for your organization, it's a phenomenal tool to essentially insulate you from the malware problem. The key with that is the PC that you use, that you segment, don't put an email client on it. Don't allow that thing to even interact with any type of email. And then you can go even a step further and whitelist the websites that can be visited, so that that PC will only visit your internet banking website, and it can't possibly visit another site that might introduce malware to it. So consider that. If it's feasible for your organization, it's a great way to insulate you from this type of attack. Finally, test. A secure system is one that behaves the way we expect it to behave, and one of the ways we validate that it's behaving properly is by testing. I've mentioned belt and suspenders a couple of times. Penetration testing, both internal and external, is very useful to identify unpatched issues and other vulnerabilities that leave us exposed. We've been doing a lot of social engineering testing with our clients, and you can do this yourself by sending simulated spearfishing messages into your organization. A very useful tool after you've trained your employees on how to spot spearfishing. Send some emails in to see how many people click on the link and test essentially we're testing their awareness and their preparedness. And then finally, application testing the tools with your bank. It takes a little coordination with the bank. I'll give you an example. I worked with an organization that lost $800,000 in online wire fraud. they got hit by a Zeus attack, like I described earlier. The wires, the money went out in two separate $400,000 wires. Well, this particular organization had a callback threshold committed to in a contract with the bank that said any wire over $50,000 requires a callback. Well, like I said, two $400,000 wires out, and the organization did not get a callback. So it's worthwhile to test the processes that you have in place with your bank and with your own internal processes that govern the handling of ACH and wire transfers. So I'll just wrap up by saying that it's kind of a gloomy overview, but it's somewhat intentionally gloomy. We're getting 3 calls a week, and there's just a tremendous amount of this going on. Hopefully you learned something from this, and my hope is that your organization will be better prepared to deal with and mitigate this growing threat. Thank you very much.